Hey, what's up New Zealand and the world? Lucas Lawman's Kiwi Voice. We are sitting in the council offices with the Deputy Mayor of Christchurch, Andrew Turner, here to have a yarn with us. So thanks for taking the time to hang out with us, Andrew. Very much appreciate it. I know you're a busy man in the council. So, shall we get into it?
Indeed. So thanks for the opportunity for a conversation. Always good to catch up with people.
Awesome.
Thanks for making the time.
Excellent. Thanks, Andrew. Alrighty, so we'll jump straight into it. So tell us a bit about yourself. So as much as you're comfortable with, it doesn't have to be just leading into politics, about a little bit who you are, perhaps in your past, etc. Who is Andrew Turner?
So I don't come from here. I was born in the UK, York in the north of England. Studied in Nottingham, lived in Brighton on the south coast, worked in London for a number of years, came to Australia in 1993 for what was meant to be a year, and essentially I would say just about never went back.
Right.
So I ended up working for a Sydney company. They saw me transferred on various projects to Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Pakistan, other parts of the world, Egypt, Turkey. I was certainly very fortunate to land that role, and it gave me the opportunity to do another thing that I absolutely love, which is to travel. But living and working in some of those places, really just broadens your mind and gives you a whole set of experiences that I've certainly found very useful in roles that I've had since then. One of the placements when I was working for that Sydney company was here in Christchurch, and I worked with people and had people working for me at that time that I continued to come back to Christchurch to visit, and I guess that was the beginning of what has ended up being a very long and very enjoyable relationship that I've had with the city. That's now obviously seen me living here permanently. So it was on one of those visits in 1997 that I met my partner, who is from Christchurch. He and I went back to the UK for a couple of years, but came back to Christchurch in late 1998 and have lived here ever since. So we bought a commercial building in Lyttelton in 2003, the Empire Hotel.
I was wondering if you bring up Lyttelton.
That was what saw the move to Lyttelton. The original intention there was to re-establish the businesses in the Empire Hotel, to do a refurbishment on the building, to sell the whole thing as a freehold going concern in the end and then move on. Well, we did all of that except for the moving on part. Our feet are still very firmly on the ground in Lyttelton, and as people may be aware, I've signalled my intention not to run for elected office in the
fair bit of media coverage for that
later this year. And one of the things I'm looking forward to as a result of that decision is actually spending a bit more time in Lyttelton. I love the place, and as I say, feet firmly on the ground there. Looking forward to be able to spend a bit more time at home and around Lyttelton, along with some other things that I might be doing. So, who is Andrew Turner? I guess that's a bit of my background. What do I enjoy doing in my spare time? I've got a very active social life, not only in Christchurch but around the country. We spend quite a bit of time in Wellington and in Auckland, catching up with friends and at various events and social gatherings. I'm also very big on the outdoors. Spent quite a bit of time tramping, climbing hills, running. I'm a regular gym goer, and camping is something that we do in the warmer months of the year as well.
Awesome. So the Lyttelton thing is it's close to me as well. So my partner, fiance of 4.5 years, Tracy, lives in Lyttelton, and has been there her whole life. So I'm there probably, 30 or 40% of the time. I get why people either, even if they leave, they start off there, why they want to come back. It's just such a beautiful place. It's so it's interesting.
It's quirky. And it reminds me of similar environments overseas. There are parts of Brighton where I lived in the UK that Lyttelton reminds me of a lot. Places like Fremantle, just outside of Perth in Australia, that would be another example. But, as I said, I travelled quite extensively in the period between leaving the UK and settling here in New Zealand. And Lyttelton for me was really the first time my feet really touched the ground and I felt part of a community. Felt as if I belonged somewhere. And that's quite special, particularly when you feel that about a place that isn't the place where you grew up, the place 100%. That's your natural home. Lyttelton is definitely home for me now, and doing what I've done there running one of the biggest businesses on the main street. When you run the local pub and the local dairy, you get to know people pretty quickly. We put ourselves right at the centre of that community. And I've been involved with community organisations there. I was on the board of Project Lyttelton for a number of years. I'm still on the board of the Lyttelton Harbour Information Centre. I was the chair of the Business Association. I was on the community board. Right. So I guess I got as involved in that community as anybody could. I ran the Lyttelton festivals and was on the committee that was on the committee that ran those Lyttelton festivals for a number of years as well. Awesome. So I've been, I guess, right at the heart of that Lyttelton community. Not quite as involved now as I was in those early years. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to about moving on from my position here at the council. It will give me more time to do some of those things that I love and maybe get more involved in some of the Lyttelton community activities that I've always enjoyed. Awesome. That's positive stuff, and I'm sure the people will love to hear that when we post this up in the Ain't No Place I'd Rather Be group there. I think we'll be the goer if they let us chuck the link up. I'm sure they will. I don't doubt there'll be some comment. There always is. Of course. Yeah. You're a politician. Of course you're going to get comment. Indeed. You've been with your partner for 25 years. Was that what I picked up there? Yeah, we'll have our 25th anniversary in a couple of weeks' time, actually. That's 14th, 15th of May, depends on what you count, but 14th or 15th of May will be us been together for 25 years. Yeah, that's that's a long time in anyone's language, but we have a great time. We had a great time in the beginning, and we still have a great time. Awesome. And we've been very fortunate to have had some good things happen to us in life, and we enjoy a very full and very social personal life. Yep. I wouldn't have it any other way. Fantastic. It's just that it's rare to hear those numbers in terms of 25 years. People these days, you get less and less of that. So it's a cool thing to hear. Alrighty, so what motivated you to get into local body politics or into the council side of things? I guess it was some of that early work in the community in Lyttelton. Yep. When I was on the board of Project Lyttelton, there was a relationship with council, and there were areas where there was partnership with council. But I certainly felt that there was a need for more of that community view of the world and some of the great work that was going on in communities to find a voice here at council. Yep. To be driving some conversations about what partnership looked like, about what we now would refer to as co-governance or co-creation, what that looked like, opportunities for cost sharing, for revenue sharing, for shared projects. Yep. And just a very different way of doing things, rather than council doing things to communities, doing things with communities, allowing projects to be led from the grassroots rather than led by council. And certainly projects in Lyttelton like the farmers market, like the way that Project Lyttelton ran that transition from council management to community management of the Lyttelton Recreation Centre. They're all really good examples of how council now partners with community organisations in a very different way. And certainly my view of that, and some of the leadership I've shown and some of what I've brought to the council table in that regard was heavily influenced by my early work at Project Lyttelton, with the Time Bank, with the festivals, getting the farmers market onto the main street in Lyttelton. And I guess, I'm in something of a unique position, having been heavily involved with a community organisation like Project Lyttelton, which is a very well organised and very effective community organisation, but also having a position of influence at council. Having had both of those sets of experience really puts me in a unique position to be able to assist with the development of some of those type of projects. So that was a part of it. Yep. As the chair of the Business Association, I was involved in conversations with the council about the upgrade of London Street in Lyttelton. Oh, yeah. This is going back way before the earthquakes. Favourite topics of people there, I think. Yeah. And the proposal was to essentially remake London Street into something that didn't in some ways look as though it belonged in Lyttelton. It would have been probably more at home in some of the more upmarket suburbs of Christchurch. Yep. And planting cabbage trees and using some lighter coloured tiles on the pavement. And one of the things that really upset the business community was that the work was programmed to occur over the summer months.
Right.
Lyttelton's very seasonal from a business point of view.
Yeah.
And certainly our view as business owners at that time was that the work should be occurring in the winter when there weren't many people around, not happening over those summer months in a way that totally scuppered our summer season.
Yeah.
And again, it just felt as if there was a disconnect between the way that council was going about that work and an understanding of what Lyttelton actually was and what the aspirations of the community were, and the workings of the business community, the seasonality of Lyttelton, how some of those businesses weren't actually hugely profitable. You know, running a small business in Lyttelton,
it's not going to make you rich.
It can be a sailing close to the wind activity at the best of times.
Yes.
So I certainly articulated very clearly, first at public meetings and then in meetings with council staff, that the right time to do the work was in the winter. The right design was one which reflected the gritty, grainy, slightly alternative facets of Lyttelton, rather than something that would have looked more at home in, you know, maybe Merivale or Fendleton.
Yeah, gotcha.
And we were successful in getting the tiles dumped down to grey. Some of the plantings were removed. Some of the shinier stuff certainly was dulled down a little bit so that it did better meet that gritty, grainy view of Lyttelton. The community had more of a voice in the look and feel of it, and in the end the works were done over the winter,
nice.
So that the impact on the business community and on visitors to Lyttelton and the wider community were a whole lot less than they otherwise would have been.
People are passionate about all of that stuff in Lyttelton.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was probably my second bit of political engagement with the council. Yeah. My first bit of political engagement with the council was only a couple of months after Glenn and I arrived in Lyttelton in 2003, and the council were proposing to close the swimming pool.
Oh, yeah.
So there were 3 businesses in Lyttelton where we ran a petition. So Brian Prisk at the Rat and Roach, Bruce Russell at the Number 6 Cafe, and Andrew and Glenn at the Empire had a petition on our counters, and we were collecting signatures. Okay. I took great delight when we got 300 submissions through that petition, to taking those to Bob Parker, who was the mayor of Banks Peninsula at the time. That represented approximately 10% of his community. That was enough to put the matter on their council table in a way that showed some strong community opposition to their proposal to close the swimming pool, and that pool was rebuilt after it was kept open by the Banks Peninsula Council, was rebuilt after the earthquakes, and remains in good use today.
Oh, very good use, yeah.
That was my first political act. But, you know, you'll see from the 3 examples I've given, I was actively involved in communities' engagement with council to get a better deal for Lyttelton.
Yep.
That very quickly led to some suggestions that I should stand for election to the community board.
Getting things done.
Getting things done. I was well supported in that first community board election. I think I got the second highest vote, which for somebody coming to the table for the first time really encouraged me. It was great to see that level of support. I was an effective community board member between 2010 and 2013. And of course that was the earthquake years, when Lyttelton was one of the most badly damaged suburbs, one of the most badly parts of the city, one of the most badly damaged Lyttelton towns, really needed an effective voice. And you look at other parts of Banks Peninsula that were in that Lyttelton Mount Herbert Community Board area at the time. Diamond Harbour lost Godley House, which was one of the key parts of the town centre in Diamond Harbour, the village centre there. Governor's Bay lost both its community centre and Allendale Hall, both of which are now back in use. The community centre was totally rebuilt. But the earthquakes certainly needed some strong leadership by the community board at that time, and I see that I was front and centre of that. That obviously then led to suggestions that I should stand for council. I did. People will remember well that I some would say scraped in by 5 votes.
Okay, really?
And that was a really interesting election. Paula Smith versus Nook Karako versus Andrew Turner. And there were a couple of other candidates as well, but we were the 3 that got the highest support. And we got almost equal numbers of votes. I think there was about 50 votes in it between Paula and I, and there were 5 votes between Nook and I.
Wow.
So there was a period of almost 2 weeks between the preliminary results being announced and the final result been announced, where there were only 5 votes, and of course neither Nook nor I knew which one of us was going to end up sitting at the council table.
Right.
and in the end, I was declared the winner by 5 votes, scraped in.
Yeah.
Leanne, the mayor, referred to that in the early days as, your landslide victory.
Yeah, of course, yep.
So, having got elected by such a narrow margin, that meant that I really needed to make the effort to represent all of the people of Banks Peninsula, to be an effective representative. Being the elected councillor is a privileged position at the best of times, but I certainly felt that when I was elected just by that 5 vote margin, I had a responsibility to deliver for all of the people of the peninsula, regardless of whether they'd voted for me or for Nook or for Paula or any other of the candidates. And the next election, 2016, I was unopposed. Yep. And in 2019, I got 76% or thereabouts of the vote. So each of the elections I've contested since then have brought me back to the table with a pretty convincing result. Yep. And I've enjoyed the work that I've done. I mean, 9 years on, I've enjoyed representing the peninsula. I've built some great relationships and met some amazing people, and some of those relationships I really hope will continue and continue to be meaningful beyond my time at council, and I'm sure they will. Yeah,
awesome. And that must have given you confidence, like you say, as each time you went around the election cycle, it increased. It obviously told you were doing, what we thought was right.
And you never know.
Yeah, you never know.
I mean, when you do what I do, it's very easy to live in a bubble, surrounded by people that support you.
Yeah, I understand.
And the people that you come into contact with are often the people that you're helping to achieve what they want, or you're pushing their project on, or you've been an advocate for them or whatever, which then obviously leads to support. So it is very easy to live your life in a bubble. The election is the one time when, there could easily be a pretty hefty dose of reality.
Yes.
I've been fortunate to have had good support and come out on the right side of that each time I've stood for election, including that very first time at Community Board, which certainly gave me a high level of confidence that I did the right thing to take the advice when people suggested to me that I should stand.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was never something that I particularly planned to do. It was never a career ambition. It was more a set of opportunities that opened up for me. And I look back at the work I did around immediate earthquake recovery and the regeneration of Lyttelton, which is still very much underway. And in some ways, I think the earthquakes, for all they were a big black cloud of damage and devastation and loss, also created opportunity.
Of course,
across the whole city. And I think I was fortunate that opportunities for me came out of the earthquakes, but along with that, an ability to be an effective advocate to push some things on that have been of benefit to Lyttelton, of benefit to Banks Peninsula, and of benefit to the whole city.
Yeah, awesome. Well put. Okay, cool. So, you've gone through some highlights and how you got into things there. So, what about some lowlights? Have you had some downers during your time in council specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have seen aspects of the rebuild happen a whole lot quicker.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would.
And some of those anchor projects, the Metro Sports, yes, that's well underway now.
It's going to be epic when it's done.
It's going to be amazing when it's done, but it would have been great to have had it a few years earlier. The arena, Te Kaha, the stadium, is another one that, I'm very aware that businesses in the central city in particular got ahead of the curve. Developers built buildings, businesses went in there as tenants. They were relying on particularly the Metro Sports facility, the convention centre Te Pai, and the stadium Te Kaha, been built and completed a lot earlier than they have been and that they will be. So I would have loved to have seen some of those projects underway and completed a lot earlier, really to reflect the confidence that the developers, the business community and others in the city had that was going to happen, not least because there was a blueprint that said that they would. So that's been one disappointment for me. As the Deputy Mayor of the city, yes, I've had some influence there, but a lot of those projects
you preempted my next question.
Are in partnership with government. We haven't been as council the only decision maker and the only influencer in that space. There's been a change of government over that period, obviously, as well. And all of those are huge projects that have turned out to have greater challenges particularly in the current environment around cost escalations, supply line difficulties, in the COVID environment, now in the Ukraine war environment as well. And that inevitably has slowed those projects down in a way that makes sense, but that doesn't stop it from being disappointing.
Yes.
So that certainly would be one area where I would have liked things to have been different. In terms of Banks Peninsula, the replacement for Godley House is still a live conversation, and we're certainly
11 years later
in a space where we've actually got a process underway where we're looking at expressions of interest that could see a building and a hospitality business re-established on that site.
That would be awesome.
It's disappointing that that's taken so long, and I've worked to try and make that happen earlier. Again, it's been the compliances and probably the speed at which we've been able to get the advice on that has slowed some of that down. Community aspirations were well articulated way back as far as 2012, 2013. I would have loved to have seen that progressed further more quickly, although I would like to think that a legacy of my time on council in the end will be a way forward for that project that does see something reinstated on that site in the not too distant future.
Okay.
Cruise ships for Akaroa and the development of a sustainable plan for tourism on Banks Peninsula, again, is something which has been a conversation that's been going on for some time. We've now got destination management planning underway in a meaningful way where the community will have a voice. That will be the opportunity to look long term at the effect on the peninsular environment of activities like cruise ship visits, freedom camping, the carrying capacity for tourism and visitors on the peninsula. And again, that's been some time coming. I would have liked to have been able to have those conversations earlier. We will be doing that, and we'll be doing it properly, but it has taken some time. So I guess if there was a common theme coming through, what would I have liked to have done differently or been able to see done differently? The wheels of local government turn incredibly slowly at times.
So remove some of the red
and
tape.
I would love to have found ways to get things moving a little bit more quickly. When you're in a highly regulated environment, the Local Government Act, the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act, our own standing orders and our own policies and practices. Coming from the private sector, I was used to just making a decision and getting on with it. Local government, unfortunately, doesn't work like that. But I would love to have been able to find ways to speed some of these projects up.
Okay, that's cool. That's nice and clear. So is it October you through to? Is that roughly when it is?
October the 8th is election day. Okay. So around 5 months to go.
Right, cool. Okay. So looking at that, we've got two questions sort of around this from now till then. What's influenced your decision to step down? I mean, there's been a lot of mainstream media coverage, as we briefly talked about before we started the interview. A lot of people were saying, "Hey, look, we thought he was the man. He's our politician, and from that space that we would like to continue to stand." And and it's not happening. So what's influenced your decision?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm aware of plenty of speculation that I was going to run for the mayoralty.
Yes.
Some of that have been driven by comments that I'd made in the media.
Got you.
Really going right back to maybe even the 2016 local body election, certainly the 2019 election. And then when Leanne made the announcement that she wasn't going to contest in 2022, that she was stepping down, that obviously led to some renewed interest in what my intentions were. And going back to this time last year, or certainly the back end of last year, I was considering very seriously a run at the mayoralty. And there were a couple of things that came into play in my thinking as I really started to consider that seriously. One of which was, the environment that we're in at the moment, the political environment we're in, and politics, of course, runs in cycles. Nobody wants to be the mayor without a supportive council. And whilst I think and I hope that we will continue to enjoy and have a progressive council after the 2022 election, this is going to be a much more closely fought election than there has been previously. Certainly is going to be a more political election, I think, than we've seen previously.
I think so too,
and it's going to be quite a different environment. And in general, we're working in quite a different environment at the moment as well. Certainly the protests we saw around the mandates and the disaffection with central governments, local governments, and more broadly than that, from some parts of society that have really stemmed out of frustration with COVID and the whole environment there, has led to quite a different political environment and quite a different social environment. I think whoever's the mayor in the next council term and on from there will be some challenges, both politically but also I think socially. And Christchurch is an interesting place in its history. There is some opportunity. There's definitely some clear water in front of us for the first time after the earthquakes, but there's still some real challenge. There are parts of the rebuild that haven't really fired. We're in an interesting environment economically. The business community has suffered because of COVID, and there's going to be some real support required there as well. And a lot of our social problems have been exacerbated by earthquakes and COVID and are certainly not going away. So there are some big challenges there. So I guess that's the political and role side of it. But along with any big decision, does a person want to put their hand up to be the mayor of the city for the next 3 years? Or if you were going to do that for 3 years, realistically, you would have a plan, I think, that went to 6 or maybe 9 years. That's a big commitment. I've been elected for 12 years already. I've thrown myself into the roles that I've had, and I've been fully immersed in them for 12 years already. And the big question for me was it time to do something different? Was it time for change? Rather than continuing to do a version of what essentially is a similar or the same role. And I deliberately took a long holiday over the summer. Had some conversations with myself. Had some conversations some conversations with Glenn, my partner. Had conversations with close friends, people that know me well, people that knew me way before council, and also took some advice from what you might call seasonal professional advisors. And all of that, after some really long and hard thinking and some real soul searching, led me to the decision that was publicised, I think it was around about the beginning of February, that I wasn't going to run for the mayoralty, and I also wasn't going to contest the Banks Peninsula Council seat. And I guess, some of that is wanting to be in control of what happens over this next period, wanting to orchestrate a well-planned and hopefully graceful exit, and giving myself the time to think about what comes next and do some real planning there as well. And I'm very comfortable with that decision and the way that I made it. And the longer it goes on, the more comfortable I am with it, which indicates that for me, it's a good decision. And it was really interesting in the immediate aftermath of the publicity of that. So the press carried their headline, and it was articulated as a shock and a surprise and so on, which I guess, I'd had a couple of months to get my head around the idea. To others that at that time was still expecting I would make a run for the mayoralty, it probably was a shock. In the days immediately after that decision, I would have received maybe 250, 300 text messages, emails, Facebook messages, direct communications. And the messages there were around 3 things. Some of it was shock and trying to persuade me to change my mind. Some of it was disappointment and a recognition that I'd done a good job in the time that was here, that I've been here. But a lot of it was congratulations on making a good decision. Good for you that you've seen that it's time to move on, and we really look forward to what the next stage of your life looks like, and we're sure it's going to be interesting. And it's been great to have the recognition of the work that I've done while I've been here. And I guess that reflects in some ways into disappointment that I'm not going to be here in the future. But equally, it was great to have what you could broadly call personal support in terms of, congratulating me on what people saw as a good decision, and support for going on to whatever the next stage holds. So I found the whole thing actually a much more positive experience than I expected to.
Yeah,
really interesting time.
Yeah, awesome, absolutely. Getting that broad range of responses or comments and messages.
Indeed.
It would be interesting to go through that and sort of start trying to weigh that up, I suppose, in your head. I just want to touch quickly. Obviously, for a lot of our viewers will be interested in this. When we first started the answer to that question, you were talking about the current political environment, and obviously the social unrest, if that's the right term, or the protest, etc. That's been happening.
Just a changed social environment.
Yes.
Probably a community with different aspirations, different concerns, and of course that started with the COVID response and disappointment, frustration, the way that changed people's lives and led to a level of anxiety, and in some cases disappointment translated to anger and so on. The war in the Ukraine, for all it's geographically far removed from here, we're seeing an effect on people's lives in terms of just that anxiety and uncertainty, and the way that plays into the wider global economy, and that has some effect here as well. And of course we've also got things that affect people deeply in their households and in their pockets. Rising interest rates and mortgage rates, rising supermarket shelf prices, and just a general rising cost of living. And that leads to uncertainty, anxiety, and people inevitably start thinking about how that translates into the kind of leadership they want to see and what's important to them. So, whilst I'm not reflecting in that in an overtly political, a right-left sort of view of the world, it inevitably means that people are looking at what's important to them, what's important to their families, what's important to their households, and that translates into, and I think we're seeing it, a changing political and social environment, and people's priorities are quite different. People spending a lot more time at home because of COVID value their local environment in a very different way. People that are concerned about income and household costs view the way that they're earning and their jobs and their outgoings in quite a different way. And it leads to changed priorities, and for different people that leads to some quite in the same way as I guess it has for me, it leads to some big decisions that lead to some big changes in lifestyle as well. Yeah,
for sure. No, that's cool. That does give us even more clarity on that, so I appreciate that. So, how are we going for time? Oh, yeah, okay, so we've got a bit of time. All right, so going forward, how do you feel about the political landscape in New Zealand? Like, just from not necessarily local government, you've been involved in politics, you obviously have an opinion on the central government and what's happening around New Zealand.
Indeed, yeah.
How do you feel about the political landscape in New Zealand now and through to the next election?
It's an interesting time. It's almost a unique time, I think. And whoever had been in government needing to deal with COVID would have had to make hard decisions, would have had to make decisions that were, to some degree at least, going to be unpopular with the community or parts of the community. I actually think that we've seen strong leadership from the current government, particularly in the early stages of the pandemic. The messaging as we moved through that, I think, became less clear or became less well understood by the community. But a dynamic situation has required changes in approach, and that was certainly what we saw as we moved through the second part of last year. And there were disappointments. There was disappointment that we ended up with that extended lockdown, particularly in Auckland from August onwards. As I mentioned earlier in the conversation, we travel regularly to Auckland. We've got a really good circle of very close friends in Auckland. And it was disappointing that we weren't able to see those people between August and December. And I think we thought in the early stages of the pandemic we'd done the right thing, we'd got through it, we weren't going to see more of those sort of lockdowns. And when that happened, it led to frustration, it led to anger, it led to questioning in some parts of the community as well. And I'm not sure that there was the same support for that lockdown from August onwards last year that there had been in the early stages of the pandemic, when a lot of people, I think, surprised themselves by how compliant they were willing to be.
Well, I did,
I'm not very good at being told what to do. I'm not very good all the time at being 100% compliant. And, I surprised myself by how much I absolutely followed the rules 100% in the early stages. The frustration around the vaccine passes, and the promise was, you get vaccinated, you get the vaccine pass, that means you can have your summer. I remember catching up with friends in Auckland on about the 23rd of December, I think it was, and it was the first time we'd been up there since the end of the Auckland lockdown. The borders opened. We had our vaccine passes. We were good to go. We had the whole summer in front of us. We were thinking events. We were thinking festivals. We were thinking travel. We did enjoy 5 or 6 weeks or whatever it was over the summer where we did have freedom. It felt like we got back from summer holidays and very quickly we were back in that very constrained environment with the restrictions, and that inevitably led to frustrations.
Right.
And I think the longer it went on, the more questioning there was from a greater number of people about the need for the requirements, about the value of them, and particularly when Omicron got underway, looking at isolation periods, quarantine requirements, that sort of thing. And decisions were made that probably largely lined up with public opinion. But I think there were sometimes, particularly through maybe the last 6 months, where public opinion was a little bit ahead of the decision making, and that did lead to some frustrations. But I come back to the point I made. I think regardless of who was in government, there would have been frustration, there would have been anger, there would have been lack of buy-in to some of the positions that were taken by governments who, I think government have taken a conservative approach to COVID. And in the early stages, and probably throughout the whole episode, that's protected as well. And it's largely been based on protecting the more vulnerable members of society, which is exactly the role that you would expect a progressive government to take. But regardless of who had been in power, there would have been frustrations and criticism.
You're exactly right, because that's been the criticism of a lot of the people in the freedom movement, I would call it, that I've been dealing with a lot, is that there was no real. Obviously, you can't change a government in the middle of a cycle, but what I mean is in terms of the speaking and the policy that would have happened either, in terms of what the opposition parties were saying or the smaller parties were saying, it was the same thing. And so you're right that the same decisions may well have been made, whether they were done in different ways. It was always going to be difficult, but I think that's also when it leads back to one of the earlier questions, going into the next political cycle, how things are just going to be so different, because so many people are seeing that there is a lot of similarities. At least through this period, there was a lot of similarities between National and Labour. And so we're going to get spread out a bit more, and it's just going to be interesting to see what happens.
And we've been in an interesting environment with Labour governing on their own.
Yes,
And
it's been unique
in
for
some
New Zealand,
ways through the pandemic, that's possibly been good, because it's meant that decisions have been able to be made quickly, and certainly in the early stages, good decisive action, well communicated, and with one political party in power, that probably led to an easier situation.
I see what you mean by that.
It's been interesting. It's the first time that that's happened, and I do think the value that the smaller parties bring may well be better recognised as we move into the next period. I think it's inevitable that the next election will be more closely fought than the last one was. With a new leader of the National Party, that certainly makes for a different environment as well. A new leader and deputy leader. And I mean, timing is everything around these things as well. The change of leadership of the Labour Party when Jacinda became the leader was the thing that changed everything with that election. The change of leadership in the National Party has come a whole lot earlier in this cycle. Yes, that's changed everything as well, but whether some of the shine will have worn off by the time we get to the election remains to be seen.
18 months.
The issues on what the issues that the election will be fought on will be interesting. Because COVID by then may well be history. We would like to think so. But all of those issues that traditionally would see support for a progressive government, a broadly progressive government, around social inclusion and social equity and a fair deal for everybody, those things don't go away. No. And certainly as someone that came here from overseas, I see New Zealand as a largely socially progressive society. The other thing I see, a lot like the politics of the UK, certainly in the period immediately before I left, the right and left of politics in New Zealand to some degree is largely different degrees of centrism.
I agree with you. It's really gone that way.
Both of the main political parties in New Zealand are, to some degree, centrist. Labour have certainly got a very close eye on what's happening with the economy, and certainly through COVID, there's been some very strong support for the economy, and some of the decisions that Grant Robertson has led as Treasurer have had the economic impact and the business community at their heart, as well as social inclusion and those social effects. At the same time, with national governments, there's still commitment to social policy. It's not just all about the business community and all about the performance of the economy. So different degrees of centrism, which then leads to a large base of what you might call swing voters who really sit in the centre, which means that elections can be closely fought. But equally, that's also the value of MMP, which means that there is room for the more extreme political views, and I mean extreme in a centrist sense as well, because this is New Zealand.
Understand,
But, there's room for that influence at each end of the political spectrum, as well as in the centre. So it will be interesting. It's something that I'll be keeping a close eye on.
I can imagine you would,
I think there's quite a bit of water still to go under the bridge between now and when the next parliamentary election is. And, there's been some commentary on the current government and current performance. There's a lot going on at the moment. That's certainly recoverable before we get to the next election, and the view of the community on COVID, for example, that may well become history as we get there. And there are still many in the community that see strong leadership through COVID has been a good attribute. Equally, maybe we're seeing a bit of extra support for National at the moment because of that change of leadership. A lot could happen between now and October, but I'm no political commentator. That's just my own personal
of course,
view.
no. Well, that's what you're here for. I mean, and if you're at the ACT party, you'll decide which side you're going to go on the day. They sort of go left, and they go right, and they centre, left, and right.
We saw a lot of increase in support for ACT because of the poor level of support that National achieved.
But now I think I've lost that.
All of these things are capable of changing and could change more and could change again between now and, the only day that matters is polling day.
Correct, No, I'm 100% with you, and I think that's it's interesting to hear from someone who's actively working in politics now that you do see such a rapid changing or fast-moving environment. Like you say, between now and election day, it looks like that Labour's losing favour and National's gaining favour, and we could have a traditional swing back to blue. But you just have no idea. That could change,
that may well be the snapshot today, or an interpretation of the snapshot today. What I'm interested in is what happens between now and the election, and it's the snapshot on election day is the one that decides what happens for the next 3 years.
Of course, for sure. Alrighty, so that's probably a good segue into our last question. We're starting to get tight on time. So what are you've touched on it a little bit, and you're really sort of, telling us a bit about your life, etc. But what are your plans for the future? So after October, what are you looking to do when you head back to Lyttelton?
I think the first thing I'll be doing is spending a bit of time at home and maybe spending a bit of time travelling. So enjoying the freedom and flexibility that not coming to 53 Hereford Street every day gives me. But I mentioned a number of emails that landed in my inbox and text messages that I received in the immediate aftermath of my announcement that I wasn't running for election again. And some of those were invitations to conversations about what the future looks like. Actually, some really nice invitations to really good conversations about what the future looks like. And I'm certainly interested in pursuing a governance career, so directorships, trusteeships. Certainly interested in where the experience that I've had in my 12 years as an elected member can continue to have use in an advisory role, maybe some contract work, but certainly still very keen to be involved in roles where I've got the ability to contribute, where my experience that I've been fortunate and privileged to have gained can still have value to various different parts of the community, and quite open to what that might look like. Our intention is to remain living in Lyttelton. We certainly fully intend that our home will continue to be Lyttelton, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be looking at opportunities both in Christchurch and possibly outside of Christchurch as well. But this is the first time since 2009 that I've had some clear water in front of me to actually think about what does the future look like, what do I really want to do. That's a nice position to be in.
Of course. Yep.
I'll be 55 this year,
yep.
so still got plenty of working life ahead of me, and plenty of opportunity to possibly do something radically different from what I've been doing.
Sure.
And one thing I do know is that I'll continue to be busy. I'll continue to be involved in the community, and I'll want to be effective.
Yep.
And the other thing I'm hoping to gain is a bit of flexibility and the ability to get a bit more balance in life between business and personal, and find the time to do some more travel as well.
Awesome. What's on the list for travel?
Well, my parents are in the UK.
Of course, yeah.
Of course, nobody's getting any younger.
Yes.
It's a number of years since I've had the opportunity to travel.
Yeah.
And obviously in recent years there have been some restrictions that have just prevented that completely.
Yes.
So I'm hopeful that in the next little while there'll be an overseas visit which will allow some good catch-ups with family, and some good catch-ups with friends in different parts of the world as well.
Yep.
As I say, having the flexibility to be able to plan that properly will be something that I'm really looking forward to.
Awesome, yeah, no, I completely understand that. I can't wait to get travelling again myself.
Exactly.
We'll close it off there. Thanks heaps, Andrew. Really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us. It has been an interesting chat. I've really bit of an insight, plenty of things that I had no idea about, so I'm really stoked about that. Keep an eye on the Facebook and YouTube. I should get it up tonight.
Yep.
If not, tomorrow morning at the latest. I don't think there's anything we need to edit out of that, other than possibly a couple of clear throats and things like that.
Yep,
so I think we should be all right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Chuck a comment down below and share these links around. You know how it goes. Appreciate everyone taking the time to tune in. We'll have a look at the comments as well. If you've got active Facebook, I would encourage you, if depending on how game you are, to get involved in the comment section if anyone chucks any questions up there for you. Thanks team, stay safe, stay free, and we'll see you again real soon. Awesome.
Great, thank you for that.
That was so good.
That flew well.
Did you?
Yeah.